All right, welcome to another edition of the Leadership Blend Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Cherie.
All right, full studio for the first time this season. Excited. I know you know this face, but you might not know that face. So we're going to have everybody introduce themselves starting to my left.
Awesome. I am Jason B. Allen. I am a native of Atlanta. This is my 20th year in education, so I'm super excited about that, and I'm excited to be back here with you all.
All right, tell us what you do.
Oh, yes. I am the National Director of Partnerships with the National Parents Union, where we create and implement positive policies for modern American families.
Beautiful.
It's so impactful.
That is not what I was going to say, but I love that for you. That's not what I'm going to say. Next.
Yep. And I'm State Senator Rashaun Kemp. I serve Senate District 38. This is my first year in the state legislature. And my district goes from Sandy Springs all the way down to Palmetto.
Beautiful.
Oh.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah. I know, right? Okay. I didn't think about Sandy Springs when I was thinking about things.
Yeah, when I think about District 38,
Yeah, it's a big district.
I didn't even think about it. Sandy Springs is one of those places like you go visit, but you don't really think about. Like I go, but it's not like someplace I would go to get anything. So it's like when he said it, it's like, yeah, that's a nice area.
Nice.
It's a nice area.
Nice.
It's a nice
It
area.
is.
It really is.
It's really nice homes up there.
Yeah, yeah. Once you get off that, what is it? 400.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get off 400 and start perusing, you start seeing all kinds of things. It's like, I didn't know this was here. I love this for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop. All right, so let's jump into the education space. And let's start with charter schools versus public schools, because people still don't understand what those are and what's the difference.
Well, first and foremost, it's not a charter schools versus public schools. Charters are public schools. I also think I would like to start with school options, because I believe, like my organization, that every parent, child, family should have the ability to access quality school options. And so when you think about options, you think about school choice. You think about charter schools, magnet schools, virtual academies. You may think about private micro schools that we have here in Georgia. You may also think about hybrid schools. We also have in Atlanta public schools in particular, we have partner schools, which is a combination of charter operated, but still in the traditional locally operated jurisdiction of the board and facilities. All of those things are managed by them. So it is a lot that Georgia offers for families, but there are private schools. And then there are public schools, and charter schools, again, are public schools here in the great state of Georgia.
Can I pull us away too? Because I don't know if everyone knows your background, but we have like two really, really qualified guests. And so can you share also your background with education as well?
Yeah, so I'm a former high school principal, originally from Ohio. Before I moved down here, I led a dropout prevention high school in Ohio. And became a principal at the age of 27.
Wow.
And now continue to work in the education space, supporting Black and brown leaders across the country that lead or founded public charter schools. And the reason why I put the word public in front of charter schools when I say it is because I try to reiterate to people that charter schools are public schools. And so to Jason's point, there is no separation. A charter school is a public school. The only difference is the way in which they're able to operate. So charter schools are given more flexibility. But with that more flexibility, they are given more accountability. So that means that if your school is not successful within the 5 years that a typical charter contract is, then you face closure. No traditional public school faces that level of accountability. And so that's the difference between charter schools and traditional public schools. That's how I kind of try to phrase it. And I just want to point out that, Jason, his organization supports all the range of school choice. And while we as Democrats support the parents' ability to be able to choose a school for their child, we do not support the idea of taking public funds away from our public schools and then giving vouchers. And so that is one of the new things here in the state of Georgia, in which there's this new educational savings account where they give $6,500 to families that are in the bottom 25% of schools in terms of performance. The issue with that is no school in our community that is private charges $6,500. Most parents aren't going to be able to afford to send their child to a school with a $6,500 check.
That's right.
So that is a big concern for us in the Democratic caucus.
I want to add that it's also important for people to understand, having been a former district administrator, I was very intentional about why is it so much hype around, the charter schools have more flexibility, and they do have a little bit more flexibility, but I also want to be very honest and say that the public school districts in Georgia can also add innovation to their very own schools locally. It starts with policy. And I know we're going to talk a lot about policy in this conversation, but again, charter schools are not doing anything different other than using their flexibility. And I want to push us to encourage our leaders, especially school board members and superintendents, to think differently about innovation.
Can we ground the conversation? So again, before we get into the policy part, and maybe this is a time conversation, like over the last 20 years or so, how would you describe the current state of education in Georgia? What some of its strengths are, or maybe things that you've seen come along, and what would you say are some of the biggest gaps, biggest problems, like top priorities?
I think that Georgia schools, regionally looking at the Southeast region, are fair. Of course, thinking about school districts across the country, we have a lot of growth to do. I will say this, and when I'm talking to families in Atlanta, I always ask them and say, if North Atlanta, which has kind of always been like the shining star of APS because of where it geographically sits and just racial dynamics, if the schools in that cluster are not building airplanes, then we're behind. Because school districts that we're supporting in California, in Arizona, even in the Midwest, they're doing that. Even in rural areas, they're doing it. And so for Atlanta to influence everything, and we don't have schools in Georgia that are doing that, we have a lot of growth that we can push forward.
Yeah, I would point to the fact that we have a literacy crisis in the state. 70% of our kids are not reading on grade level. And so that's some of the work that I tried to do in the legislature. And that's actually my first bill that was signed into law addresses that. And we have a lot of work to continue to do to ensure, because when you said 20 years, it just made me immediately think of the fact that just in education period in the United States over the last 20 years, we were using a failed way of teaching our kids how to read. And now we're realizing it did not work. And, what it's called is 3Qing. It's pretty much teaching kids to read by guessing. So people would take a book and they'd say, hey, read the sentence. And then when a kid gets hung up on a word, a teacher would cue them and say, well, look at the picture, try to figure it out, or look at the word next to it. And now we're figuring out like that is not a proper way to teach children how to read because we're not teaching them to learn how to actually sound out words and decode them. And so we're now getting back to the basics.
So is that sort of like phonics? It was sort of a breakdown of phonics.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right. We got away from that because as in education, we always kind of like chase after the next shiny thing. Like, oh, this is going to be the magic wand that's going to like make every kid, love reading. And while teachers were seeing short-term gains, like if we were in a classroom and you figured the word out by me cueing you, I'm thinking, oh, you got it, you're good. But then when you go on to 4th and 5th grade and those pictures aren't there and somebody's not there to cue you, then we're realizing like, oh, these kids really can't read. They were just guessing. So now we're getting back to really teaching phonics to where kids learn how to sound out words and know the letter combination so that they can then decode and apply that to all words that they are confronted with when they don't particularly know what that word is.
I don't know, but just in 5 minutes, I learned something because I was wondering. My kids do that. I'm like, you can't look at the picture. Like, you have to be able to sound out what's in the sentence. That's right. Now I see why they do it. I'm like, why are you doing that? Oh, God.
It's learned behavior. And to even go a step further, it starts at home.
Yeah.
So even if parents are doing that method at home, at least the children have a foundation. They have a base where teachers can come in and say, hey, I see that you're doing this, but this isn't the correct way. I will say this, by trade, I'm a special education teacher, and most special education teachers in Georgia are trained in the science of reading. However, a big part of this conversation when we think about the literacy crisis is that our colleagues, our counterparts who are in general ed, most of them are not trained in the science of reading. So if you think about what we're doing in Georgia, where we have at one point in time, 20 years ago, we could possibly say we had a slightly, smaller special education population. Now we're kind of neck and neck with special education and general education. And the students are struggling across the board. And a lot of the reason why is because the teachers cannot teach the basics of literacy. And they'll also say, that's not my job. That's the reading teacher's job. Or now that we don't have reading teachers in the state of Georgia any longer, it's the ELA teacher's job.
So that's exactly what my bill does. It addresses that. And so now by law, our Professional Standards Commission has to ensure that all of our teacher prep programs are preparing teachers to teach kids to read using the science of reading, because we found out like this is a big kind of like donut hole in our education system. Like we're not requiring by legislative accountability that teacher prep programs are aligned to the work that we're trying to do in our K-12 schools.
I mean, this brings two questions for me, because I'm curious about, so what's ideal, but I'm also kind of curious about what about all of the other kids, right? So what do we do with the 5th and 6th and 8th graders now? Like I feel like there's so much conversation for people who are outside of the space that revolves around 3rd grade and 2nd grade as these sort of like crucial defining points. Yeah. And even working in reentry now, and we meet so many adults coming out of the criminal legal system who may have learned to read in prison, or who are still adults but who are functioning and illiterate. And I do think, I wonder how much investment there is in getting people literate, getting kids literate past primary school, because if it's no one's job, especially in high school or middle school, what does that mean for all of the kids who are now still not able to read the way that they should be?
Yeah, we're still at the very early stages, I think, of this. It started in 2023 with the Georgia Early Literacy Act. It's like realizing, okay, we have to do work with the children that are coming into our schools when they have to learn, and they're at the stage of learning to read. Let's address that. But if you think about it, as I shared, for the last 20 years, we've been teaching people in a failed way to teach them to read. Yeah. And so we have adults, we have high school students that were taught that way of reading, and they're continuing to be passed along. And that's why you didn't realize when people get to college, they're having to take remedial courses or they're dropping out. You look at our prisons, 70% of the people in our prisons are illiterate. And so it can kind of traces back to how people were taught to read. And you think about behavior in schools. If a kid cannot read, they're going to do everything they can to avoid having to read. And this is going to address so many things. But I truly believe that policy is going to have to then now address students that have already gone through the process and who are struggling, and also adults who are functioning illiterate.
Policies on the federal and local level. I also look at, with the National Parents Union, we have so many different coalitions we are a part of, and juvenile justice is one. And when I think about suspension rates, students that have been displaced, our homeless population of students, which is growing in Georgia due to housing affordability, which impacts transportation, food deserts. It's a chain reaction. One thing leads to something else, it leads to something else. One of the things I love about Senator Kemp, I almost called you Rashaun, Senator Kemp's bill is that it focuses in on early literacy. Now, I want to highlight this because this is important. Over the last 20 years, we still have missed the mark with supporting one very important population of people when we think about early learning. And those are our mom and pop daycares that are across the state of Georgia. We also have to be very realistic. A lot of people cannot get into the pre-K programs. You think about 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, as they are, still in the early learning, early childhood, early literacy stages and development. They are going to, I'm not even exaggerated, as we've been going across the state of Georgia, there are some parts that are still using Common Core, that are still using Race to the Top resources in there for families, because they're using what they know. They're using what they have. Okay. And so if we're not reaching them, they're still doing what they can. They're doing the best, but they're not properly setting up children to have a strong foundation for early literacy. So when they get to kindergarten, they're happy children. They're very happy. They're loving, but they're behind. And it's not their fault or their parents' fault or even their community. These are people who are hardworking. They're doing the best that they can. But we also know that the resources don't always make it to everyone. They don't come to every doorstep.
What do you mean can't get into the early programs or pre-K programs?
Actually, before you answer that,
Okay.
because me and a friend were having this conversation, I'm not well versed in pre-K stuff. What is the objective for pre-K? Is it to prepare them for kindergarten, or is it to, or is it just exist for people to drop kids off like daycare? Like, what was it designed to do, and is there some kind of presence that makes sure they do that?
Well, I would say that the design of pre-K was most likely probably designed to be daycare. We want to care for children. I mean, if you really want to be honest about the educational system, and the reason why we're still in the 1920s model of education is because that is the history of our education system. It was really to babysit children. And so as we have changed over time, and especially in the last 20 years, more people have focused pre-K on making sure that children are kindergarten ready, that they understand directives, they understand how to be polite, character, all of those things. It's to help them be prepared for being in a different type of setting where it's not as, let's say, relaxed as being in, a daycare or pre-K setting.
And it's beyond the soft skills. It truly is now to prepare them for kindergarten. That is the goal of pre-K. There are standards that our pre-K schools have to follow. I think it's right from the start or something like that. Like, they have to follow these standards. Just like in K-12, we have, the Georgia standards. There are standards for pre-K schools to ensure that students are being prepared for kindergarten. The problem is Georgia is not putting the funding necessary forward to be able to get all kids into pre-K. So to Jason's point, there's a waiting list. Students aren't able to get, kids aren't able to get into the schools because there's not enough funding put in place. Georgia has the money. We're just not putting the money there. Our Republican colleagues are more focused on cutting taxes or having money in a rainy day fund versus actually spending it on what matters most. And if we put more money into early childhood education, into pre-K, we would better prepare our students. And also, it's a workforce issue. If I'm a parent and I have to decide between paying for daycare or sending my kid to pre-K, which then would be something that is paid for, I may decide to stay home. One of us stay home because it's more affordable for one of us to stay home versus both of us working. So that's a big issue that we need to address and push for. Next year's an election, so hopefully we'll be smart in who we elect.
Well, that's what sparked the conversation, because they were talking about taking money from pre-K or doing away with pre-K or something to that extent. That's what sparked me and my friends to have the conversation. It's like, well, now that we think about it, what is it designed to do? Like, we felt like it should be designed to prepare them for kindergarten. It was like, is that what they've been doing?
Yeah. So, the investment. I have an investment question though, because you've both mentioned funding, and I've heard from people who, I don't know if they're on the left, but I heard from a lot of people that Georgia spends so much money on education, and so I always wonder, like, compared to what? Like, or is that the question? Is it just a misappropriation of spending?
I think people,
or do we not spend a lot? Because I'm like, I always question people say we spend so much money. I'm like, do we really?
We really
compared
don't.
to who?
Well, we do.
Compared
that's
to,
the number
but
one.
Compared to who? Compared to other states? Compared to other
how
countries?
we're using it. But go ahead.
So when you look at our state budget, it's like $38 billion, right? The vast majority of that money goes towards education, right? The issue is how the money is spent, right? To Jason's point earlier, he mentioned that traditional public schools and districts have the same ability to be flexible as charter schools. Many of them are. So Georgia created this law where we allowed school districts to use waivers, so they can like waive themselves out of different requirements, right? And what those requirements it kind of was tied to money. Like, okay, like if you want to have this money, then you have to do X, Y, and Z. Now they can kind of waive themselves out of it and now have more flexibility to spend the money. One of the things that we noticed when, for example, one of the biggest areas of growth for spending has been administrative. Versus in the classroom. And so really it's a matter of how that money is spent, not necessarily how much money they have. I mean, of course, obviously, anytime you have more money, you're able to do more things. And Georgia has a very outdated funding formula that needs to be updated.
Yes.
It has been updated since 1980s,
Mm.
like when I was like born, right? So we need to change that because we're still teaching kids based on a formula of when many of the technologies and things that we experience now weren't even in place. So we need to change that. But, so it's kind of a two-edged sword. Like, yes, we do spend the vast majority of our taxes goes towards education. The Atlanta School Board actually their budget is bigger than the city of Atlanta's budget. So education does get a lot of money. It's just a matter of how that money is spent. For example, the current superintendent came in, and I think he's going to be great, of APS. And he, did a lot of cuts at the headquarters and administration because they're realizing too many of our schools and the school districts are too top heavy and not enough of the money is actually going into the classrooms. And so that's where there's like kind of a void happening.
So when we say going into the classroom, are we talking about personnel or are we talking about supplies? What are we talking about?
All of that. And paying teachers more. I mean, one thing that Atlanta did, which was great, was give all teachers a raise. And Atlanta obviously is the highest, I think, the highest paid school district in the region.
They are.
And we need to do more of that. In order to keep teachers and to gain teachers, we have to be paying teachers more. And that's where more of the money should be going versus paying for like assistant principals and all the other administrative things at headquarters. Like the more money should be in the classrooms.
So I want to say the things that I know Senator Kemp can't say. And I definitely 100% will say that administrative across the board in Georgia schools is where a lot of the funding is going. It reminds me of Race to the Top because really that's where the money is. It stays at the top. It never really trickles down to the ground level and the bottom where the teachers are, where the children are. In Atlanta public schools in particular, and having worked with Superintendent Johnson and his team and just thinking about what they're doing and how they're moving things forward, I will publicly say that I think it would be good to see a superintendent say, I'm getting rid of a floor on the central office.
Okay.
I would love to see that. Matter of fact, just that looking at the numbers, looking at parents' concerns, looking at teacher concerns, a couple of departments and 2 floors in that building actually could be shut down. I would love to see APS actually lead a literacy initiative and offer, sounds like a very radical idea, but 24-hour childcare. When we talk about teachers getting a raise, which is great, we also forget that nurses, school clerks, parent liaisons and parent coordinators, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, these are also those amongst the working poor who help to operate our schools. They oftentimes can't afford to live within the limits of the district that they work in. And this is not just within the city. This is also thinking about, going from county to county. Like I can afford to live in this county, right? But I can't send my kids here because they're over where I used to live because I had to be pushed out. There's a lot of that happening across our state, and no one is really looking at the dollars in education and how are we actually supporting our overall workforce outside of the teachers that keep our schools going.
Outside of Atlanta and even North Atlanta, how are rural Georgia schools, like Southern Georgia schools, or just the 156 counties in the state? But the other counties that we don't talk about, like, are they doing better? Are they doing worse?
So I'm gonna pass it to you. I just want to highlight a couple of them. I won't call them by name because when you do that, people get in their feelings. But I will say that some of the areas are doing some really innovative things with the university system, and not even in Georgia. For example, there are a couple of colleges in South Carolina and Alabama, respectively, that utilize our public school districts, our high schools, to build their talent. I don't really see a lot of that collaboration with our partnership departments in our Georgia school districts. So I would say that there definitely is some growth and innovation there, thinking about innovative ways to connect our young people graduating to the workforce here in Georgia.
Yeah, the literacy crisis is not just a metro Atlanta thing. It is a statewide thing. No matter what your demographics are, it's a struggle. And so, everybody's implementing the, science of reading and making sure that, we're doing phonics instruction and things like that. Just yesterday, actually, the governor signed the budget for 2026, and that's the one that's $38 billion, $37.7 billion. And for the first time ever, it includes a grant for school districts across the state to educate students who are economically disadvantaged. And that is for both Metro Atlanta and rural communities as well. Georgia, for the longest, was one of only 6 states that did not give additional funding for educating students in poverty, because we all know that it requires additional funding to have like all of the resources in order to educate them. So this is the first time that we ever put money in it. It's only about like $15 million, which isn't, it's kind of scratches the surface, but at least it's a start. And so that money is going to support rural communities and Metro Atlanta communities as well.
It's really helpful.
Yeah.
We've talked about mental health a lot before. And so I'll just say really quickly, I think if people are kind of skimming to see what's been going on, at least in this most recent session, when it comes to education, they'll probably see a lot about school safety. There's so many conversations about DEI and the content of certain materials. And I'm really interested in mental health in particular. I think maybe that has something to do with school safety. Maybe it has a lot to do with where we are kind of culturally. But what would you say are some of the biggest, what would you acknowledge is genuinely lacking when it comes to mental health in schools?
Social emotional learning is under heavy attack because of DEI. It really helps address a lot of the communal issues. You think about gun violence, you think about violence in schools, you think about the abuse that children witness at home and community. Social emotional learning across the board, whether kids are starting in pre-K or graduating in 12th grade, helps us to be better citizens. To be quite honest, it helps us to live up to the ideals that we claim that we strive to do every day as a country. Social emotional learning, I'm old school, so I know Senator Kemp will appreciate this, because grandparents will say social emotional learning is character development, it's character building. And I think that we can all agree that character is something that we should all be striving to build in this country.
I was going to say something, but I'm not going to say what I was going to say. I'm going to leave that one.
So social emotional learning helps with a lot of that on the federal level, and even on the local level, a lot of programs are being impacted. So when we think about crime, after school programs help alleviate that. They drive social emotional learning and something we call out of school time programming, but that's also being impacted by federal cuts. So if people are losing their jobs and there are not quality after school programs that I will say reach all children, because if I'm not in poverty, $2 or $3 to go to the Boys and Girls Clubs is a lot. If I have 5 kids in the home, I'm just being honest. See, that's not my story, but it is the story of Georgia families. And so if I can't go to the United Way or the Boys and Girls Club and funding has been cut, that the other programs in the community that my child or my loved one could go to are not there, what other options do working families have if now even the grandparents and great-grandparents are having to work part-time because the recession is hitting everyone? So it's a real question to think about.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I actually voted against the first version of the budget that we had in the Senate was because when the budget came over to the Senate Appropriations Committee stripped money away from mental health. And I got up and voiced concern on that, because I felt like we needed to invest more in mental health, especially when we're talking about school safety. The one thing I'll call out all the time is when they talk about school safety, they never say nothing about guns, right? They don't want to do anything when it comes to guns. Well, if you're going to say that a lot of the reasons why we have these school shootings is mental health, why would you then zero out a line item that is giving more money to schools for mental health? So thankfully, when they came back with the budget, they put that money back in there. And a lot of it was because the House said, look, these are kind of like our non-negotiables. And the Senate, for whatever reason, stripped that out. But, we still have a lot of work to do. When I talked about the funding formula, part of the funding formula says that for every 450 kids, you get 1 school counselor.
That's right.
There's no way that a school counselor is going to be able to be effective with a caseload of 100 or 450 kids, right? So that's when we talk about like updating our funding formula. Those are the things that we need to change. There's been legislation put forward by Democrats to say, okay, let's at least get that down to 250. I mean, still that's like way too much, but that has not gone anywhere. And I don't think that stuff like that is really going to go anywhere until we just fundamentally have the leadership in the governor that says we're going to update our funding formula to be more relevant with the times that we live in, because mental health is so important. And all students, when you look at school shootings, a lot of times they were dealing with some sort of mental health crisis.
Oh, yeah. So
we need to be more proactive versus reactive when it comes to the mental health environment in our schools.
I feel like it can be so tough to have like a conversation when there's so much federal creep, like when there was a time, I feel like in politics where there were so many state conversations happening that had nothing to do with federal conversations, or where it was just white noise. And now I feel like they're so similar, because I can imagine that if the country doesn't take mental health seriously, or if we have a hard time acknowledging that mental health care is healthcare, or that healthcare is comprehensive or is a right, or that whether or not you want to pay for it, you live next to somebody and do not think that they should be in their right mind. It's not convincing enough to people to get them to spend what needs to be spent. So it's like, but I do wonder about this a lot. And I also wonder about it for financial reasons, for one, but then also for like, what is missing? Like, is it the lack of data? Is it that it's not politicized enough? Because I also feel like in some cases when the political argument is made, you can see things move really quickly. Where it's like, I thought nothing moved that quickly. But if the will is for it, is there.
It's a lack of leadership. Like our focus, like the governor's focus this year was tort reform, like changing how people can file lawsuits, right? Really, in order for us to update our funding formula in the way that we fund education and all the services that surround it, it requires gubernatorial leadership. And so that is why I will continue to say that next year is so critically important, because we need a governor.
And you're running for governor.
I'm not running for governor.
I was waiting for a plug.
I'll make a plug.
Governor.
I will make a plug. My colleague Jason Estevez is running for governor, and I think he will be an amazing governor. He was former school board president of APS, so he understands education critically. He taught before, so I think that one of his pillars is updating our funding formula. So I'll put in a plug for him.
Okay.
It's a good plug.
Good information.
I actually vouched.
Yeah.
I did an interview with you guys when I ran against Jason in that school board election.
Before
he went.
Wow.
Jason is a great guy. Even before he was on school board, just knowing him, he's been very consistent with his focus on education. And, just going around the state, I'll say two things. I know that people want something different, and they want someone who understands the dynamics of what's happening with us in real time, and how to move policies that impact the bottom line for everyone. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's a leadership issue, but poverty makes money. When people are not well, people make money. And I know that sounds the way it sounds, but it also is a reality that when hospitals close, somebody is making money. When crime is growing, even though it's impacting our communities in ways we do not like, ways that we do not prefer, when people are not well, they are in hospitals. They are in someone's care. They are in prisons or in jails. And those things make someone's bottom line grow.
Yeah.
Now to you.
Yeah.
First term, how did it go?
First term, this was a lot. It was a learning experience, good and bad. There was a lot of controversial bills this year. Like this year was tough in terms of just the attack on the LGBTQ community and the lack of focus on the everyday people and the issues that we deal with. And, Governor Kemp still has another year, so he has another opportunity, another shot that he can take to update our funding formula. So hopefully he'll do that. But this year, the focus on like tort reform was a lot. That was the governor's big issue. And, the Democratic caucus took a very strong stance against it because it, in our view, takes away the right of everyone to be able to hold businesses accountable and takes away the ability for our justice system to work properly. It's kind of putting a thumb on the scale and saying, well, yeah, I know you're supposed to have, a jury of your peers. Right. And if that jury says they are awarding $100 million because of the harm that a business did to you, then so be it. That's the way that our jury system is supposed to work. And so now it's putting limits on that, which we feel is unfair to everyday people. But, I will say also a very big silver lining was me as a freshman Democrat to be able to pass a bill and to get it signed by the governor was huge. So it just shows that you can still go in there and stand up for what you believe in, but you can also find ways to work with people that on every other issue outside of education, we disagree on, but we were able to find common ground and to get something done. And I think that's what you have to be able to do. I truly believe that people didn't elect me to be a great Democrat. They elected me to be a great senator. And so my responsibility is to work with whoever is going to be willing to work with me to get things done that's going to positively impact my community.
What prompted you to run? Like what was it? What made you be like, okay, I need to run?
Yeah, so I've always, coming from an education background, and when I was in Ohio, our governor at the time, a Democratic governor, I'm very progressive, but when it comes to education, I do believe that charter schools have a very important role to play in our education system. Our governor at the time was opposed to that. And so that exposed me to the true political side of education, right? Then coming down here, living in Atlanta, I moved down here because of the opportunity. Like, gosh, Atlanta is where like Black people are running everything, right? Yeah. But then you realize Atlanta also is has the greatest inequality of any city in the United States. And we all play a role, right? We have, people that run for office, people that protest, people that are doing work on the nonprofit side, and I just truly believe that my calling is to work on the policy side, to do what we can under the Gold Dome to take our concerns and our issues and get laws passed to improve our way of life. Whether it's getting laws passed or getting money in the budget, we have to be able to do that, and also to be able to call people out. Like, I am now the first openly gay man ever elected to our state Senate, right? And so there is an important role that everybody's voice plays in being a part of the conversation. And I felt like we should have a seat at that table for people to understand that we're just normal, just like anybody else. We want to have families. We want to live happy lives. We just want to be able to love who we love and be able to do that in an environment that celebrates us. And that doesn't happen if we don't have a seat at the table. And so I feel like it's an important responsibility for me to be that voice for, not just the LGBTQ community, but for the Black community, for the Hispanic community, for, my generation. Just everybody has to have a voice that represents them. And so I think that's kind of my calling.
How was the process? Like, if I was to think about running for Senate, what was that process like?
It was
you have
a lot.
A family as well. So
I have a family.
How did that play out?
It was a lot, and it continues to be a lot. My husband has to be actively involved. My daughter now understands, like, oh, if Poppy's dressed up, that means he's going to work. And so, but my son also, who's 21, loves this stuff, right? So he was able to work on my campaign, and he's, he's now getting ready to graduate in December, and he's going to probably be in like the political space doing something. But it's a long process from the primary to get into the general, and also I had a runoff.
21?
He's 21.
Look at us.
Yeah.
I'm too curious. How old are you?
Yeah, I'm 45.
Go ahead.
Oh, we same age.
Amen.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had a runoff from the primary. So it started with 6 of us. Ended up in a runoff. There was 2 of us, and then I won that by 60% of the vote. So
nice.
It's a lot of work, a lot of door knocking in the summer. Communities where the houses are far apart and the driveways are long, but I love the door knocking. That's probably the part that I love the most.
The organizers at the table,
I like to call people.
I love to call people.
I don't want
to.
I volunteer. I love to call. Now, I don't. Let me also say, for people who are running for office this season, that does not mean that I may call for you. This brother I believe in. So it's great. I love the process.
It's important.
When you're not doing it, it can be fun.
Yeah.
Can I ask for both of you, related to your question, Ricardo, what do Democrats need? What do we need more of, basically? So who do we need more of in these spaces? How do we get more of us in those spaces? Like what is needed? Is it more young candidates? Is it more LGBTQIA two-spirit candidates? Is it more Black or brown candidates? Like what is missing?
Humanity. We need balance. We need different leaders. I think people who have held offices for a long time and, have kind of upkept the status quo, you have to be realistic and say, am I taking advantage for things that are benefiting me or maybe my family, or am I doing this for the greater good? You also have to have people who are willing to make sacrifices that go beyond just themselves, or maybe how they identify or their immediate community, and think about others who are not always at the table, people who may be left-handed, or people who are Jewish, but they're married to a Muslim, multi-generational families, multiracial or multi-ethnic families. So I think everyone wants representation, but I think at the end of the day, people want humanity. I want someone who's going to get in here and do something in a political space that benefits the greater good and for everyone, not just for their special interest group.
Before you answer, because yours can be very specific, because there's this big, because I was reading about it today, this big thing of having younger senators and things of that magnitude. Being in there, do you see that? Like a lot of the older senators holding the line on issues that are not important or not at the forefront versus the millennials going, no, this is what we should be focused on. Do you see a lot of generational chaos under the Gold Dome?
No, there's not a lot of generational chaos. Actually, some of our older senators, I was just having a conversation with someone about this. Our longest serving senator, David Lucas, I was just talking about, like, sometimes you look over, like he's nodding, right? But within just a minute of that, like David Lucas will push his button and he'll go down to that well. And the fiery speeches that he's able to give from the perspective of actually living through the civil rights movement makes a huge difference, especially in a room full of people that aren't far from his age. So it's important for us to have a wide range of representation. That's and great. So now being down there, I ran for office before and challenged an incumbent, and was, one of those voices said, oh, we need to, it's time for new voices. But I think it is important to have a mix of new and old voices, because it's important to have all of those perspectives in that room. There's only 56 senators across the state. And so it's important to have voices from all different walks of life. I will say we do need more diversity. And I will say from a Democratic perspective, it's important for us to be able to have the folks that are coming in behind us and preparing them. I think that we don't do a good job enough of that, like to really saying, okay, I know I'm going to only be here for X amount of years, or I'm not going to be here past whatever time. We need to be getting people prepared to run for these seats, and also start conversations with people like, look, man, like, sit this one out, please. You don't need to run for this seat. And because, one, that drains resources, and it also scars the eventual candidate. I mean, granted, I do think that we need to have fiery and, competitive, primary races, but some people running, like, you should not be running for this office. But encouraging people, to run when they're ready, and making sure they're well prepared when they do run, I think is really important as well.
Strategy is key. I think also, to Senator Kemp's point, we're also missing out on the strategy side, because if we have people saying, hey, how are you organizing your campaign? What is the need of the community? What type of power play are we trying to play? I also will say transition is a huge gap. And I want to speak specifically to the Black community regarding this. And it's not just politics. It's in how we operate our churches, our schools, our nonprofits. And I'm just thinking about, in our national coalitions, a lot of our partners that closed their organizations, one of the things they said was, oh, I wish I would have called you and I had this resource, or I knew to train some more, I knew to have like somebody in place, or this strategic plan. And those things are important. That's why a lot of Black churches, schools, organizations have closed within the last 20 years. It's because of lack of transition planning.
So in politics, though, it sounds like you're both kind of saying that it's not a lack of access. It's not a lack of people interested in these positions. It's a lack of strategy. You'd say it's more so a lack of strategy.
Well, that, and I also would say it's a lack of interest in some of the important races that have more of an impact on our daily lives. Like, I don't see enough people running for school board or for city council or even for a state representative or, Senate. A lot of people think like, oh, the sexy thing is running for Congress or, some of these bigger offices. But when you look at it, your city government has a more of an impact on your everyday life. And, the higher it gets, the further it gets away from like your everyday life. And a lot of people just kind of are more interested in the title and what they see on TV versus like the real impact that you can have on people's lives. And so we need more people running for offices and being interested in those offices, because we do have a lack of just voter interest when it comes to, like, we have a PSC election. People probably don't even know what that is, the Public Service Commission, right? But they literally are the ones that are supposed to regulate the industries in which electricity and like all of the utilities are.
The Comcast monopoly?
Yes. And they don't hold them accountable. If we can get people to run for those offices, which we do have very strong candidate Daniel Blackman running, we can really change how our lives are impacted by policy, but we don't get interested in those types of elections.
Are some of those tricky though, like with the school board? Isn't it teachers can't run for school board? Because should we have to get the law changed to be able to do it?
True. And so when I ran, I was teaching in Clayton County, but I was running for Atlanta Public Schools. And so that's typically how most people do that. Like if you are employed with it's ethics, it's so many things. But if I'm employed with the entity or organization I'm representing, I can't actually be on the board. Right. I mean, even in the charter space, I was the chair of Ivy Preparatory Academy. And I mean, I couldn't be employed with Ivy and be the board chair because the executive director, the principals, they, provide reports and, all of those things to the board. So it's important to have that separation.
Yeah. So just to be clear, yes, you can run for school board. You just can't serve in the district that you are employed.
Yes.
Yeah. So Chevy is in Clayton County, but is on the APS board because he lives in Atlanta. Yeah.
And we need more of that. We need more teachers. We need more counselors. We need more social workers. And I'm naming them specifically because I have a former student who was in the student group with Jaden, who's getting ready, Aisha is getting ready to graduate. And she did a research collaborative with one of our NPU partners, focusing on the civil rights case of social workers and counselors and how it's inhumane for a social worker to have hundreds of kids for one school and is responsible for not just the children, but the families. Yeah. It's almost like we're setting you up for failure, and then we don't have a support team in the school to really help meet the needs. And for a young person to see that and say, these are the deficits in education that we need to feel is important. And that connects directly to literacy and mental health.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. It makes you think back so much on your own education. I stayed at the counselor's office in high school. I know I stayed there.
Yeah.
Half the time I didn't want to be, but I could walk in there anytime. I'm sure I would have been able to sit down, which is insane to think about.
Yeah. Well, when you look at it, because we were talking about this, me and the teachers at school the other day, and we were talking about our counselor. It was like, she can't really counsel because she spends more time with the families trying to get them the resources they need to get these kids to even get to school.
Yeah,
you're right.
So it's like she has no time to sit down with the troubled kids that we have and, do any real work because she's too busy spending time with the parents, getting the kids to school, clothes, food,
grief. If somebody, life is happening.
My husband was a school counselor, and a lot of times, to your point, school counselors are also serving as a social worker.
Yeah, literally.
And if they're not doing that, then they're doing scheduling, which has nothing to do like with mental health. And a lot of times when we think of school counselors, it's preparing them for college or like talking to colleges, versus really true mental health. Like that's what we need counselors to be able to do. And too often they're having to do other things that takes away from the grief and like the things that like I want a counselor in a school that's able to have some sessions with some kids. Like that's what we need.
Yeah, because these kids are dealing with adult problems.
Yeah.
Like I have second graders that have adult problems. I know their home lives. And I'm just like, And I get caught in the hard place. Like, I can't let you take my class, but I know what you're dealing with, and I would have a hard time dealing with what you're dealing with. But what do I do about the behavior? Because you can't just take the class. So it becomes this weird space you kind of have to navigate, and not having a school counselor to sit down with them and help them walk them through it. Yeah. It's just like you're kind of left to your own devices, which doesn't always go well.
Right.
I mean, counselors also, and just with this one point, counselors support the educators and the teachers. Right. Teachers are not trained on a lot of these things. So in good faith, teachers may want to do things and they're like, oh, let me pick, we don't have a counselor. We don't have this. Or even some schools have counselors where they visit the schools bi-weekly or maybe once out of the month. Man. And that is, wild within itself. So just, it's very serious why we need parents, community members involved in school board elections and local elections. We hear a lot from the Trump administration that says, we're sending the power back to the states. Well, if the power's in the states and we know that the data is showing that people don't show up to local and state elections, then if you think we have 99 problems right now, I mean, just imagine when these elections come and people sit at home thinking that, the faithful few are going to go out and vote and fix this for us. No, we need everybody civically engaged and active.
You can't this go around and teach them that. I don't know what else they need to know. Because this should have taught us a very valuable lesson.
Yes.
That you're not voting is a vote, in essence.
Thank you.
It's a vote.
Yeah.
Okay. The scariest piece of legislation you saw this term?
The scariest. Oh, gosh, there's a couple. Okay.
It could be more than one.
Okay. So first, I'll start with the one that did not pass. So Senate Bill 120 ended up being like a House bill. They stripped a bill for educators to give them more sick paid time off. They stripped that bill and put in an anti-DEI bill in that, right? And that's where I'll talk about like David Lucas. Like it was so effective for him to get up and look directly into the sponsors' eyes and say, we are not going back, talking about going back to what he lived through in the civil rights time, right?
Was this Max Burns?
Yes, Max Burns. Yes. All right, know your stuff. Good stuff. Yes. Max Burns, who chairs the Higher Education Committee, right? That bill did not pass. So that's one good thing. But just to keep people aware, any bill that did not pass can still get life when we go back in January. Yes, they're still alive. They can still move. So that can still move when we go back in January. The scariest bill to me was the Riley Gaines Act. This is the act that targets transgender girls in sports, right? And I understand that, people are going to feel some type of way. They can feel whatever way they feel about transgender girls being in sports. I'm a girl dad, so I understand people's concerns, right? About fairness, right? I get that, right? The issue with this bill is it allows any parent to challenge a child's sex. So whether you're cisgender or transgender, I can now say, well, hey, this girl is too good. I believe that she could be trans. And as a result of that, now that child and her family has to prove their sex. I thankfully was able to get the bill changed to where there is no physical check of a child's sexual organs. It could have been if the way that they had that bill written. So that's like how scary this stuff is. Like literally someone in a school could have been responsible for checking a child to see what their sex is, right? So now it's just you have to show your birth certificate and there's like some like testing that has to be done, but it's like super expensive. And the question is, who is paying for that testing? So my concern with this bill is not just for trans girls, which I have concern about like their mental health, but also cisgender girls that are now going to go through the possibility of a parent challenging their sex because they're too good at a sport.
It's literally a witch hunt.
Yes.
Literally a witch hunt.
Yeah.
But it's also such a huge waste of resources because we also know this as former school leaders, like, when you look at your athletic division in your department, there are already checks and balances there when students go to apply for sports and what they have to go through and the training, all of that. And so I feel like, again, on the local level, here we are now under the Gold Dome passing or trying to pass bills that focus on this when we already have checks and balances.
Georgia's notorious for taking a single story and writing a law.
Exactly.
Like,
they took
oh
that whole like swimming
how many
thing.
resources and like how much money. So when we talk about dollars and cents at the end of the day, how much money and time are we wasting when we already have checks and balances in place to further try to bring harm to shame,
right?
And division,
right?
Yeah, and Riley Gaines ain't even a Georgia resident. That's what like makes me so mad. This girl don't even live here. Like she's paid to go across the country.
Like, I'm sorry, your kid just sucks. Your kid's not going to college for this.
She would not have meddled regardless. So I'm just saying.
Most of the people who are complaining about this. Your children are not even going into sports. I just if they listen to this,
and the students that identify as trans are less than 1% of our population. Like we're talking about, like we're making an issue out of a non-issue.
Abortion is not a Georgia problem.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah,
you were going to mention another bad bill.
Well, I did DI, I did the trans, and then just the tort reform. I'm really concerned about that. Like it was passed under the guise that our insurance rates are going to go down. So I'm very interested to see over this next year if our interest rates actually go down in terms of like our insurance rates. But my concern with that is the limits that are now placed upon people's ability to hold businesses and kind of like, the man accountable. It takes away from the rights of like everyday people to be able to sue. So
for the average Joe who does not understand that, what does that mean to the average Joe?
Yeah, so a tort is like saying, hey, I was harmed by something, and so I'm going to take you to court because I was harmed. One of the big things with this was this thing called premise liability. So if I own a business and something happens on my property, how accountable or responsible am I for what happened on your property? For example, a lot of people talk about like a Six Flags case. Six Flags had an issue with gangs. And people kept telling them about it, kept saying like, it's not just, people coming, it's like actually people like on your staff, right? So, as Six Flags, you have a responsibility to ensure people are safe. So that means you need to bring in more security, have more surveillance, things like that. And if you as that company ignores that and something happens, I should be able to say, hey, you failed to protect the people that are coming to your establishment. So I should be able to sue you. And the jury, who are 12 peers, should be able to decide how much my harm is worth, right? Mm-hmm. And so what the reform does is it limits what juries can say you are to be given, and it limits the responsibility that's placed upon businesses. Another example is, there's a CVS case where someone was murdered on their property, but what was found out was CVS knew about the issues that were happening after night. They did not do enough to keep their parking lot safe. Now, there could be an argument that, well, how fair is it that, this happened after hours, but like they still have responsibility because that's your property to, if you have to put up, gates to stop people from being able to come on your property at night, because there's a certain responsibility that you have as a business owner to ensure that people are safe and that nothing happens on your property. So that's our concerns with the, tort reform legislation. I'm
curious because I have family members who are impacted by that, especially if you work at Waffle House or if you worked at CVS. And I know CVS had strong challenges with security, in their parking lots. And so I'm just curious, will this help the business to do their due diligence, especially a Six Flags that's right near a highway? You think about violence, you think access to sex trafficking, all of those things that an amusement park can attract. Are these businesses being held accountable to also train their staff on what to look for, how to be engaged? Because they're also propositioning people who work in these places to harm people, especially at Waffle Houses where there are a lot of fights. I'm just curious about, because those are the things that I know people are like, I'm seeing the fights, I'm seeing the fight, and not just at Waffle House, I'm seeing the fights in the CVS parking lots. I'm seeing, a lot of the violence happening in these places. Is this bill, or would that bill help to hold them more accountable? Or is it going to the responsibility of the people?
Yeah, it was not to hold the businesses accountable at all.
Right.
It was all about limiting
I think
the
if you
people.
thought about that,
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like, what happens with these cases, like, you'll hear, like, people talk about nuclear verdicts, like these really big verdicts that people get. A lot of times it's because the businesses, instead of settling, decided to take it all the way through court. And so that's another right that they have and that the people have. Like, a lot of times people are willing to settle well beyond getting to some nuclear verdict. But the businesses being the businesses and saying, look, we got the money, we have the ability to hire these like great attorneys. And so we're going to risk it and take it to court. And then when these juries come back with these verdicts, they're like, oh, this is totally unfair. Well, the process worked how the process is supposed to work. It's worked since the founding of our country. And so like now they're crying foul because they were willing to take that risk
because they could
take
afford
it all the way to court. Right.
Because they could afford it. And they didn't think you could.
Right.
But the people, that's why I wanted him to answer in that way, because I want the people to also know that it is a process. And that is why, again, it's focusing back on the civic engagement. People have to hold their local elected officials accountable, because also in Georgia, we have let's say a habit of, we have one family that is going through this gun. We're going to push this one family story, even though it's impacting hundreds of people across the state. And we need those hundreds of people to start using their voices as opposed to saying, okay, this is going to be the one family that we use for this story to push this. No, there are hundreds of people across the state that are impacted by this. And if we start hearing, let me not say we, if you're elected, let me look at these cameras. These elected officials start hearing more from their constituents, we would have more of a place.
It's true. It's true. And also making more noise. And so it's difficult, I think, when you don't have civic education in schools, when people don't understand how the process works. Georgia's not the worst at this, but it could be better. There are plenty of states where if someone wants to participate in a hearing, if someone has a comment, if someone has a story, they don't have to physically go down to Capitol Street, to MLK, to actually have their voice heard, figure out how to get off work, figure out who's going to watch my kids. They don't have to do all of that. There are plenty of states where you can submit a written comment via a portal, where you can email it to somebody, where you can do it right there on the spot, where you don't have to physically be present, where you can call in, where you can Zoom in, right? And I think that makes civic participation much easier. If people have to figure out, how can I take this day off? If they go to a committee hearing and there's 29 agenda items and you've now been here 6 hours or 8 hours, who knows when the next one's going to get called? Well, there's a 24 or 48 hour notice. That's not enough time for me to figure out how to get a sitter. I can't participate in the process. Like there's so many of those like little things that I think if you're always, if you stay down there, then fine. But for most people, you need a lot more structure than that to be able to figure out how to get down there on a weekday and how to have your voice heard.
That's true. Yeah.
We need an organizer.
Yeah.
Call me.
And on that note, final thoughts. What do you want to leave with the people?
Final thought is we need you. Like, we truly need more constituents to engage us, to have your voices heard, and to not only reach out to the people that are representative of you, because a lot of times we're like-minded, right? We need people to come down to the Capitol to speak to other people in the Senate, in the House, because they need to hear voices of everyday Georgians. And a lot of times we kind of like silo ourselves to only talk to our legislators. But if we truly want to make a difference, they need to hear from you. And in addition to that, we need people to get out and vote next year. Next year is a major election. And my fear is that we're going to have this apathy, especially within Democrats, like, oh, well, we can't win a statewide race. Yes, we can. Like, the numbers bear out that we can do it, but we can only do it if people show up and vote. And so we need people to get out and vote. Governor Kemp is term limited. So we're going to have a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, because he's running for governor. And we have some really strong candidates that are going to take issues that we truly care about to the governor's mansion, to leading the Senate, and hopefully we can flip the House or the Senate, but it only happens if we show up and vote. And reach out to us. Like, we're here to help anytime people have issues with any state level agency, whether it's Department of Transportation, Department of Labor. We're able to help people get their unemployment checks flowing. So reach out to our offices, because a lot of people in our communities don't know that our legislators are here to serve and to provide constituent services with any state level agency.
How do they reach you?
Yeah, so you can reach me at rashaun.kemp@senate.ga.gov, or on social media, Rashaun for Georgia.
Final thought.
Final thoughts. This was a great conversation. Let
Do
me
I
just
need to
say
give you a
that.
time? Do I need to give you a time limit?
No time
No.
limit. My
Yes.
final thoughts are we definitely have to be intentional about how we move forward. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. We have so many great people across the state that are organizing, that are teaching, that are leading, that are running for office, that are in office, who are doing great things. I think in this time period, it's important for us to be connected. So I'm here to help connect people. Education by trade. So civic engagement is easy because it starts with building relationships. And if we're intentional about that, we can truly see change. People can reach me at jason@mpunion.org. And those are my final thoughts.
Nice.
Have me back.
Nice.
Good
Good
to
to
have
have
to,
you
because
back.
now I'm in education space. I like to talk these conversations out because I like to know what y'all are doing because I know what we doing. Final thought.
Just same as what both of the gentlemen said. Just get connected and also get pissed off.
Yes.
That's what moves people to act. Get pissed off. Don't be apathetic.
All right, so there you have it. Special thanks to our guests today, Senator Kemp and our guy, Jason G. Allen. And we'll see you same time, same place on the Leadership in Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Sherry.